Thank you for listening to the Following Films podcast. I'm your host, Chris Maynard, and today we're diving deep into one of the most powerful and often overlooked chapters of American history, the 1898 Wilmington Massacre. I'm thrilled to be joined by two award-winning filmmakers, Brad Lichtenstein and Yoruba Richen, to discuss their documentary, American Coup, Wilmington, 1898. This poignant and timely film, airing on PBS's American Experience on November 12th, sheds light on the deadly race massacre, an insurrection that reshaped North Carolina's largest city, and whose echoes still reverberate today. The film invites us not only to reflect on the past, but also to grapple with the ongoing dialogues about race and justice that continue to shape our nation today. I hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
When I see films like this, there's a part of me that is just so deeply embarrassed that this is not a story that I knew already. This is just something that there could not be a more unfortunate time to live in where a story like this is so salient today. But it is an important story and one that I think we would need to revisit anyway. And for a lot of people, I think they'll be introduced to it for the first time, like myself. So I was just wondering if you could both talk a little bit about how you were introduced to the story and when you became familiar with it.
Oh, why don't you go first this time, Brad?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having us on. And the story really is unknown. That's why you didn't know anything about it. It's unknown because it was deliberately erased from history. And we didn't know very much. I didn't know very much about it. All I really saw was some sense that something had happened bad in Wilmington when I visited the lynching memorial that is in Montgomery, Alabama. But until PBS North Carolina reached out to us to ask if we'd be interested in producing and directing this film, I really didn't know anything either.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew very little. I had heard something about Wilmington that some events happened, some racial terror happened. There's a film that came out called Wilmington on Fire, in like 2016, 2017. And that's really all I knew. No details. Nothing. And as Brad said, which is why I wanted him to start, it makes sense that we wouldn't know. People in Wilmington did not know, as, featured in our film, the descendants, say that.
Yeah, exactly. And that just has to be, I can't imagine the undertaking that has to be, where's the film here? If you're going through and you're thinking about this and this thing that's been buried for this long, how are you going to find the people that are actually contextualizing this story, that are able to carry the story on, the people that know the story? Is there enough there for a film that you'll be able to go into? Or is it just these sort of little, this digging up this piece of history that it's really difficult to find, something like a Gabriel Prosser story or something like that. There's little pieces of history, but it's to get the full story is incredibly difficult. So how did you know that you would have enough here for the film?
Well, actually, we had a lot. I mean, we were fortunate to have started this film after the publication of a book called Wilmington on Fire. Wilmington's Lie, by David Zucchino. And that was a Pulitzer Prize winning book.
Now I'm even more embarrassed.
Oh, no worries. Please do not be. Pulitzer Prize winning book. David Zucchino is a journalist, and he told the history very, in a way that was very relatable, that was very understandable, very gripping. And so we had, that was the first thing that basically we did, is read that book. So we knew there was a lot of history and a lot of context. We also knew that we wanted to include the voices of descendants, both Black and white, perpetrator and the victims. And we were fortunate enough to find out that the descendants of, mostly Black victims had been meeting And also Lucy Macaulay, a descendant of a white perpetrator, had been meeting together for, about a year through this organization called Coming to the Table, which brings blacks and whites folks together to talk about and deal with these kinds of racial issues all over the country. And this one in Wilmington was focused on 1898. So we were, introduced to them, and then, of course, made more efforts to bring in other, specifically white descendants, but other descendants as well. And I'll just say too that John Jeremiah Sullivan, who's featured in the writer who's featured in the film as well, he and his organization, Third Person Project, had been doing a massive amount of work and research, collecting all kinds of photos and articles and incredible amount of research for a number of years. So we also had access to his research. So so we actually knew we had a film and that it was going to be, pretty that it was going to be, tell the story and include present day. So it was really a question of, then what do we not include?
So was it more of a challenge to get the people who were on the African American, the black side of this event, or was it of the white descendants of this? Because I could imagine there being people not wanting to relive trauma that wasn't their own necessarily, but they've experienced it through the generational aspect, or people that don't want to own up to something that they're a descendant of, that it's a part of where they are. So I could see that being complicated on both sides. So was there either side that was more difficult or challenging to get through?
I think it was challenging and rewarding for everybody because, as you point out, for white descendants, there's a lot of shame in many cases. Other than Lucy, the white descendants who appear in our film were just beginning to reckon with the past. They also came from families that were not, really focused on trying to learn about their family's role in this history or to go through any kind of process to achieve some kind of accountability, whether that's reparations or, just being public. Frank Daniels probably more so than others behind Lucy, in the sense that he really did run a newspaper that had shifted so much in terms of its editorial and journalistic approach from the days of his great-grandfather, Josephus Daniels. So I think he was eager to engage too. And for the Black descendants, this is generational trauma.
Yeah.
It's hard to not just talk about the violence, but also to have to be reminded of how much was lost. And Yoruba and I were involved in actually a summit that brought people together for a conversation about the film, about how we can be very transparent of the workings of our process, and to hear, in a forum where it's easier to talk about what it feels like to participate in the film. So it was a lot of really good work. It's kind of, I think, how films should get made is, focusing on those relationships and honoring the stories.
There's something to that I think we can learn from as a society, where I think that those conversations are kind of the things that start everything. The end goal of where we need to be, we kind of find that along the way, but we have to start talking to each other first before anything else and kind of own this. As a white guy with long roots in this country, I know there's some ugly stuff back there. I know that, there's roots that I'm not necessarily proud of, and not even that far back that I can look to, and these things that are a part of my lineage. And I have to own that and understand that that is a part of it. And there are advantages that I got from that at that time that, and just taking that part of it, I think, is a big step for everybody. That it's not, I don't feel like a finger is being pointed at me in that sense. And I think that that's where a lot of people get confused on that. They feel like you're at fault for this. It's not necessarily that you're at fault for it, but it's something that the society shaped out this way because of this long shadow of our history. And it takes multiple generations to get through these things if we're being honest and open and working through it. And we've shut the door and we've closed it off. And it's like we haven't even started to engage with this conversation until 100 years too late. So I'm just glad there's films like yours that are re-engaging with these conversations, because we desperately need them right now, to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that part of the mission statement or the goal of this film?
Well, I think it's so, it's what you're saying is exactly right. And I actually didn't really think about it so much with this film in terms of the that conversation that's opened up, that sort of accountability that is that we see happening in the film amongst the white descendants, and that relationship building. I actually did another film about reparations pretty recently, about reparations specifically pretty recently, where we also had white descendants of slave owners grappling with their history. With this film, I did not think of it as much, but someone came up to me after a screening and pretty much said a similar thing that you just said, and how important that work was. How important it was to see that on screen, and how it invites white people into the conversation, which I think absolutely that we need to be doing in this country, and that it's not about pointing fingers or blaming. And in fact, what I found in this film, and in my other film, is that it's very healing for white people to do it, to start engaging and grappling. And everyone has their own, different ways of approaching and doing it. But I think it's those first couple of steps, and certainly Wilmington, we can point to, it's not that long ago. It was documented. It was there, it was right there on paper. So there's really, it was a fact. There's really no debate about what happened.
No, absolutely. And there's the thing that I think that ends up, because you weren't thinking about that part of it directly, is probably why it has that impact. Because a lot of times when we directly tell people, this is what happened, this is what we want to get out of this is where we need to go, there can be a rejection from that sometimes. And if you just introduce all these facts and you put it together, all these pieces, and put them all in a room, we all draw the natural conclusion together, I think. And it's the same thing, that feeling that white people have on the inside that have been here for generations, that, we've learned a part of this history, where unfortunately that's being shut down in some states now, and we're not continuing to learn this history. So it's why a film like this is so important right now, that we do need to know these stories to better understand one another, and to learn how to engage with each other in a way that eventually that becomes from a place of empathy, instead of a place that is from, how are you different from me? It's, how are we the same? I think is what we need to be looking for.
Yeah. Or a place of denial.
Yeah, no shit. And that's something that's something that we all have. I think that's a common. We all have a level of denial.
I think one of the most powerful things about this project is not just the film, but also that PBS North Carolina is working with educators and the state curriculum, apparatus, to make sure that the film and the resources are now going to be part of how North Carolina history is taught from now on, which, given the way that it was buried and the way that it was completely stricken or lied about in textbooks, is, even more powerful.
Yeah, no, it's the idea of burying something, stories like this, that it's makes it sound like the story isn't worthy of being remembered and being told, because it informs so much of who we are now. And that's why we have to honor and respect and own our history. And you honor it by telling the most honest version of it that you can. And so
look, it's like the echoes of that story that we tell are so resonant today when we think about, for instance, the use of disinformation by the media to create these bogeymen that everybody is supposed to fear, and how we pound on crime, or paint these tropes that are completely not true, whether it's in our story and we're talking about this idea that Black men are epidemically raping white women, or that, bad government has something to do with race. These things are not that different.
And it has a very, to me, and I wear my politics on my sleeve. I'm not embarrassed by it. There's elements of this that feel far too familiar to where we are right now, to where we are. You look at the rhetoric that we hear around immigration, and it all feels very familiar. This is a playbook that we've been deploying for hundreds of years now. We move it, and is it going to be the Black community? Is it going to be the gay community? Is it going to be the immigrant community? And we just do that. We demonize entire groups of people as a way to hold on to power. And so that's what's happening again right now. And we're in the middle of it. And it's this 50-50 split in the country, could go either way in less than a week from now. And we have no idea where it's going to land. But the thing I love about this film, though, is me, if I were telling this story, you would hear way too much my point of view, and it would be a guy on a soapbox for an hour and a half. It would be unwatchable. You've made a film here that I think is highly political, but it feels apolitical in the way it's delivered, that I think you could have people from multiple, points of view that could watch this and get things out of it. I don't think that this is a movie that'll turn people off because of, what they do at the ballot box necessarily.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I know we love hearing that, and that it's resonating in that way.
At least to me. I'm not an expert on that side of the aisle.
To Yoruba's point earlier too, telling this history is so important, and so is telling it accurately. And so a lot of times I think we also felt like we were sort of like investigative reporters trying to mine the facts from all of these original documents, and with the help of all these experts that we were able to work with, because we wanted every single thing in it to be absolutely unshakably accurate. Because to your point, just like anything in today's environment too, you can dispute things and make people feel like things that are true are not true. But if you can point to all your original documentation and you can point to the evidence, there's a great line in the film, in one of our descendants, she says, like, I have this file, the family folder of her ancestors. She goes, I call it the evidence, just in case anybody denies that it's true.
And it's people will. It is that denial element that you were talking about, the idea that people will push back because it's that uncomfortable truth that we don't want to face. And I don't feel like there's no accusation. There's no finger pointing in this. It's just this is kind of part of what we came from. This is a piece of where we are today, and why these things are recurring and cyclical and come back. It's because we never owned the truth of what we come from.
Well, and guess what? While this was, of course, the only successful permanent coup in American history, it was not the only massacre. There were over 170 massacres between the Civil War and Tulsa, and we only know about Tulsa so much because there was actually film footage. So we can hear that story, or we see that story. But, all you have to do is go to the Lynching Memorial, and you see the amount of terror and violence that's been perpetrated on behalf of white supremacy in this country, and it doesn't stop.
I think it's the lack of exposure to these true stories, to this, that makes people just be able to try to put it away in a box and not deal with it because it's uncomfortable. But it is something that I think it enriches you as a person to know the true story and to know the whole story. And, to have not heard the Tulsa story until I was in my 20s is, again, that I should have learned about that prior to being in college. It should have been much sooner in my life. I should have known about that. There's all these other parts of our history that we learn about, but I hope that we're moving towards that, because I don't want to go down this path again. But there's another thing you touch on in this film that I think is really important. It was you mentioned it a second ago a little bit with the journalist idea and the way that newspapers were owned, and they had these very specific points of view. And we moved away from that for a long time. And now it feels like we're inching back into that world again. And we are back into this place where these things that are supposed to inform us, that they have very specific ideologies that they are trying to promote, and they give a very specific set of truths, of facts that they try to put out into the world. And we're getting dangerously close to repeating that again now. And that, again, it's the salience in this film is just, it's depressing, but it's also something that is not told in a way that feels hopeless. There's a message of hope in this film, I feel.
Yeah. And, hopefully this will this film, as we said, we have a big education campaign, impact campaign, and it'll spur people to find out more, because as we said, this wasn't the only massacre. And also, to look for ways that we can start the repair process, both to our democracy and to each other.
Yeah, there's so many elements to it, and it's just the conversations that they're the first thing that needs to happen, and there's the end goal of where we knew and how do we level society, which is a much loftier goal, and the idea of reparations and these things that I deeply believe in, that we need to figure out a way to level all these wrongs and this generational wealth that was passed on, that was just these entire communities where that what would the saddest part of this film to me is what could have happened if this fusion party would have continued, if this part of this would have gone on and there would have been this equality that would have been established at this point. What would our society look like today? How many years would have taken for us to get a black president? How many years would have taken to get a woman to have had a woman president? When would we be at that point? I think we would have been much further along than we are now if this particular town wouldn't have been destroyed.
Yeah. And, after the coup, after 1898, 2 years later, Jim Crow was instituted.
Exactly.
There you go.
It was, it's that desperate cry to hold on to power. And it's just the things that happened in those years after, and the silencing of these stories in the immediate aftermath. It's the Jim Crow era laws and all the stuff that happened in Reconstruction and all these things that, it's just I know that we're running out of time, and I could go on about this stuff for days, but I just really highly recommend that people check out the film. So this is something that I think it's very important, but it never feels like homework, which is a difficult balance to pull off. And I think you guys did a great job with it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Time enough to figure you out. Time enough to write this down. Wish me luck, give me hope. So witchcraft.